The days blurred into one exhausting performance. Elissara ascended the throne straight-backed, taut as a string, her face hidden behind a flawless mask of calm. She signed decrees that disappeared the next day. She issued orders that her own generals sabotaged. She watched courtiers exchange glances when she forgot meetings she had never scheduled. They were trying to drive her mad. Adrian, methodically, drop by drop, poured the poison of doubt into the kingdom's ears. The queen is tired. The queen confuses dreams and reality. Can she bear such a burden? But the nights were worst of all. In the silence of her chambers, where every shadow felt like a spy, Elissara allowed herself to tremble. She suffocated with helplessness, knowing the web around her had been woven too tightly, until one night, a shadow spoke. Commander One of the guard was no courtier. He was a soldier, terse, scarred across the cheekbone, with eyes trained to sense danger miles away. He found her in the library, where Elissara was searching in vain for missing archives. "Your Majesty," he said quietly but firmly. Elissara startled, instinctively straightening. "Juan. Aren't you supposed to be on duty at the Western Gate?" "I was reassigned," he replied curtly. "By order of the Prince Consort. Mercenaries have taken the post instead." He stepped closer, a breach of protocol that made Elissara's heart quicken. But his hand did not hold a weapon. He offered her a crumpled, torn scrap of parchment. "I found this in the barracks, among the belongings of the captain who accidentally died on the hunt yesterday morning." Elissara took the paper. The text was fragmented, full of threats about removing the obstacle, but that was not the worst part. At the bottom, stamped into the remaining sealing wax, was the imprint of Adrian's personal signet ring. The crest of a serpent devouring its own tail. She raised her eyes to Juan. "Why come to me?" she whispered. "If Adrian finds out, you'll be executed for treason before dawn." Juan stepped closer. In the dim candlelight, his face looked carved from stone, but in his gaze burned fury, not at her, but for her, "because I swore an oath to the crown. And the crown is you, Elissara, not the man warming his hands at your fire." He hesitated briefly, weighing his next words, then said the one thing she most needed to hear: "You are not alone. And they have underestimated you. They think they've broken a woman, but they've forgotten they stand before a queen." Silence settled between them. Dangerous, heavy silence. His trust was salvation. One could become her sword in the dark. But it was also a trap. If Adrian were to see them now, the queen and her commander whispering in the dead of night, he wouldn't even have to invent lies about madness. He would accuse her of infidelity. He would ruin her reputation with a single blow. Elissara hid the scrap of parchment inside her sleeve. "If we lose, Juan, our heads will fall side by side." "Then it will be a worthy death," he answered without a trace of doubt. This scene was steeped in quiet strength. A moment of stillness before the storm, where the steel within Elissara was forged. Here is the artistic rendering of that episode. Rumors spread through the palace like mold along damp stone walls. Servants lowered their eyes when she passed. Courtiers fell abruptly silent the moment she stepped into a hall. In every glance she caught the same question, carefully planted by Adrian: has she truly lost her mind? Elissara could feel that invisible noose tightening around her neck. In the privacy of her chambers, by the light of a single candle, she unfolded an old, worn letter. Her father's handwriting was broad and unwavering. "A ruler's strength is not in the crown, Elissa. It lies in what remains when the crown is taken away." She reread the lines, breathing in the scent of aged ink, trying to find in them the firmness she so desperately lacked now. She needed air. She stepped out onto the balcony. The night wind struck her face, cold and sharp, sweeping away the cobwebs of doubt. Below sprawled the capital, a sea of lights flickering in the darkness. There slept the people who believed in her. People she could lose because of one man's lies. Elissara gripped the railing until her knuckles turned white. She did not weep. Tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. She thought. She calculated her moves. Behind her came a soft sound. Not threatening, not stealthy, simply presence. She did not turn. She knew who it was. Only one person ever dared to intrude on her solitude without disturbing her peace. One approached silently. He did not bow. Here, beneath the stars, such courtesies felt pointless. He simply placed his hand on the stone railing beside hers. On the cold stone lay a dark red rose. Its stem was thorned, but the bloom, perfect, opened to meet the chill. "For you," he said quietly. His voice was low, like the rumble of the earth. A reminder that even under pressure, something lives. Through stone, through frost. Elissara looked at the flower, then lifted her gaze to him. There was no tenderness of lovers in their eyes. No promises of eternal affection or honeyed dreams. What they shared was stronger. It was the gaze of soldier to soldier before a decisive battle. A recognition of shared burden. An understanding that in this palace of crooked mirrors, only the two of them reflected each other without distortion. "They think I will break, Juan," she said, not hiding her weariness. "Let them," he replied, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword. A broken branch poses no threat. Until it pierces someone's heart. He stepped back into the shadows, leaving her alone with the rose, and with a new, cold resolve. This was not a romance. It was a conspiracy of two honest souls against an empire of lies. The circle had closed. We had returned to the beginning, but now we knew the price of this moment. It wasn't merely the assassin's failure, it was the triumph of her endurance, and of her bloodline's foresight. Here is how this scene binds everything into a single whole. The night was torn apart by thunder. Wind howled through the chimneys like a wounded beast, drowning the whispers in the corridors. Her chamber doors did not open, they creaked ajar. A servant, pale and trembling, stepped inside, carrying a single object on a silver tray, a golden goblet studded with rubies. "From His Highness Prince Adrian," he mumbled, not daring to raise his eyes. "A token of reconciliation. To help you sleep peacefully tonight." Elissara took the goblet. The wine inside was dark as blood. "Tell the prince I accept his gift," she said evenly. The servant bowed and vanished, closing the door behind him. Elissara was alone again. She lifted the cup to her lips. The smell was sweet, spiced. Too spiced. She took a sip, a faint metallic taste clung to her tongue. Bitterness masked with honey, she froze. Then slowly, almost ceremonially, she swallowed the wine, hemlock and nightshade. A classic. She knew that flavor. She had known it since she was 10 years old. Her father, wise and merciless in his love, had forced her to ingest microscopic amounts of poison with her breakfast each morning. "Kings are not killed on the battlefield, Elissa," he used to say. "They are killed at the table. Your blood must become your shield." Adrian had studied the history of conquests, but not the history of her family. Elissara did not collapse. She did not claw at her throat. She felt only a slight numbness in her fingertips and a burn in her stomach. Her body entering battle, and winning. She took the goblet and left her chambers, heading toward the throne hall. The hall was empty and dark. Elissara approached the shadow throne. She sat, smoothing the folds of her gown. She placed the half-finished goblet at her feet, and she began to wait. She heard people gathering behind the doors. Heavy steps. The clatter of weapons. They were giving her time to die, but instead of death came clarity. This goblet, it was the final proof. Now her hands were untied. No more doubts, no more lingering pity for the man she once loved. He had just tried to kill her, time was up. Behind the doors, Captain Volkas's voice rang out. Elissara drew a breath of the hall's cold air. She was pale, but alive. The doors burst open with a crash, a flash of lightning lit her figure upon the throne. Even death, they served me clumsily, she whispered as the captain stepped inside. Very well. We will play by my rules. Thunder split the sky above the palace, and in that same instant the doors of the throne hall did not simply open, they were broken down. Soldiers in the colors of the prince consort's house stormed inside. At their center, stepping over shattered wood, walked Adrian. He was no longer pretending to be the caring husband. His face was carved into a mask of triumph, sharpened by the impatience to see a corpse. He halted when he saw Elissara on the throne. Alive, but he mastered himself quickly, for behind him stood force. By order of the king, you are under arrest, he declared. His voice rang confidently, echoing against the stone walls. For treason against the crown and for madness. Elissara did not move. She looked at him with a light, lethal curiosity. The king. She repeated calmly. How interesting. Which one, exactly? Adrian opened his mouth to answer, but the words stuck in his throat. From the deep shadows, from behind columns and tapestries, figures emerged without a sound. Steel glinted. This was not the palace guard. These were Rohan's men, battle-hardened veterans whose blades were already aimed at the backs of Adrian's soldiers. A dead silence fell over the hall. A wordless standoff. No shouts, no blows, only the weight of 100 eyes. The queen rose slowly. In her hand she held a stack of papers. Even death, they served me clumsily, she whispered as the captain stepped inside. Very well. We will play by my rules. You were searching for treason, Adrian. Her voice was soft, yet it cut through the air sharper than any sword. She threw the papers at his feet. They scattered like white birds across the dirty floor. Letters. Secret deals with border enemies. Orders for bribes. And on each one gleamed the bright red seal of the serpent, Adrian's personal sigil. She descended the steps of the throne, moving toward him. Step by step. You wanted my fall, she said, meeting his eyes. But I fall only to rise stronger. Adrian blanched. His gaze darted from the papers on the floor to the blades of Rohan's guards. He looked to his own men for support, but the guard hesitated. One of Adrian's soldiers slowly lowered his spear. Then another. They were mercenaries, not martyrs. They saw the queen alive, the evidence undeniable, and where the true strength now lay, and it was not with the usurper. The clatter of weapons dropped to the ground rang like a sentence. Elissara did not stop. She walked past Adrian without even turning her head. She did not command that he be seized. She simply stepped around him as if stepping around an empty space. He was nothing. A ghost dissolving into air. She walked toward the exit, and behind her, Rohan gave a signal to his men. Elissara stepped into the corridor, leaving behind the man who never became a king. The heavy doors closed slowly, with a long, echoing scrape, shutting the light away from the darkness.